goes for this start count.
Hi, I'm Matt, and I'm here with Curtis, Jing, and Tony, and we're here today to talk a little bit about welfare fraud. First of all, I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, and he's going to give us a little overview of our presentation of welfare benefit fraud.
Welfare fraud can be simply defined as the intentional misuse of government assistance programs, and this can be done in one of two ways. Perpetrators can either provide false information to government agencies, or they can withhold relevant information from these agencies. And welfare fraud can be broken down into 5 main categories. The first category is food stamp fraud. The second is unemployment benefits. Third, women, infant, and children fraud, also known as WIC. The fourth is Medicaid or Medicare fraud, and the fifth category involves Social Security programs. The first category we're going to briefly discuss is food stamps. And despite what the media may have the public believe, food stamp fraud is not actually on the increase. In fact, the government agencies tasked with monitoring and administering these programs state that food stamp fraud is actually on the decrease. And they report that only 1% of benefits paid out under these programs are paid out fraudulently. This means that 99% of all of these benefits are validly paid out. The second category is unemployment benefit fraud. And this can be accomplished by this includes individuals either receiving benefits for a period longer than they are entitled to, or receiving benefits that are greater than what they are entitled to. And our next presenter will discuss unemployment benefit fraud in great detail. The third category is WIC fraud, which stands again for Women, Infants, and Children. And this program can be abused in one of two ways. One way simply involves providing false information to the government agency about the number of children one has. This will, of course, naturally increase the benefits received from the government. The second way is much more common, and unfortunately almost impossible to track. The majority of fraud under this program occurs when people simply sell the food that they purchased using these government benefits. Because this type of fraud is literally impossible to track, there are no statistics available, and unfortunately, these statistics will never be available for this particular type of fraud, which leaves this program particularly vulnerable to some degree of fraud. The fourth category of welfare fraud involves the Medicaid and Medicare systems. While this type of fraud is better discussed in a presentation on healthcare fraud, it is important to mention this so that everyone knows that welfare fraud does involve these government-administered healthcare systems. And this can take 2 very distinct types. These systems can be defrauded by the users of the system, the individual people that the government provides benefits to, or healthcare providers can also take advantage of these systems. And the last category that welfare fraud can fall into is Social Security benefits. Since the Social Security Administration tracks all information needed to administer benefits, it is rather difficult for individuals to actually manipulate that information. So instead, the majority of frauds involve either receiving benefits for a period longer than an individual is entitled to, and this can be accomplished either by staying on disability, receiving disability benefits longer than an individual should, meaning that once they are healthy enough to work again, they do not take the necessary steps to remove themselves from receiving disability checks each month. And another common type of fraud that involves receiving benefits for a period longer than they are legally entitled to is simply not informing the Social Security Administration of someone's death. Now, while most coroners and funeral homes are required to turn in death notices, there are ways to circumvent this rule. And the other common way to defraud the Social Security system requires using someone else's personal information entirely. This means that someone uses another's name, address, and Social Security number in order to receive benefits that are in no way linked to that individual person. So that is a brief overview of the 5 main categories of welfare fraud. And now our next presenter will continue on.
Okay, I'm going to give some examples of how the fraud concealed under unemployment. Consequently, concealed earnings fraud committed by individuals. Fraud due to concealed earnings represent the largest source of fraud in the U.S. individuals, with the relatively low earnings constitute a larger fraction of those committing such fraud. Earnings more than $405 from employers in 1 week where benefits are collected and not correctly reporting true total earnings for that week. Failing to be ready, willing, and be able to work, for example, out of area, on vacation, sick, suffering total disability while collecting benefits. And also, using another person's identity, such as giving the fake name, social security number to the file claims, helping another person file a false unemployment insurance claim, helping with another employer to illegally claiming unemployment insurance benefits. Higher earners legally receive larger unemployment checks than lower earners because each work collects benefits equal to a percentage of his or her previous earnings, giving limited resource to deter fraud and to recover overpayments. The unemployment system faces a trade-off between the costs of the perpetrators of these frauds with the dollar amounts the government is likely to recover. Now I'm going to give to Tony.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about how each fraud is detected. First, how is one suspected of welfare or benefits fraud? The Department of Public Social Services, or DPSS in this case, is in charge of the welfare fraud prevention and investigative functions. DPSS serves a county of a little under 10 million residents, which is a larger population than 42 states and has an area of a little over 4,000 square miles. DPSS has a caseload larger than any other jurisdiction except the states of California and New York. DPSS also has a budgeted workforce of more than 13,546 employees and serves the public at 50 local offices located throughout the country. So basically how the DPSS deals with cases, they will ask individuals to provide information about their family when they apply, and any changes that happen later on, they'll ask you to report. If any information given that is wrong or suspicious, the DPSS will think you lied and will investigate accordingly. The first part of the DPSS that handles the early fraud and prevention programs is called the Welfare Fraud and Prevention Investigation, or the WFP&I. The program's main objective is to have early fraud investigators detect and prevent welfare fraud before the benefits are actually issued to the citizen. Roughly half of the WFP&I staff is stationed in 31 DPSS district offices for the early fraud detection programs. There are roughly 330 employees assigned to the WFP&I, and more than 2/3 of these employees are investigative staff. These investigators are selected from current employees based on their experience, which ensures knowledge of the program and the DPSS policies and procedures that are in place. And the last section of the WFP&I is the section that deals with the investigative/prosecution units. This part assigns approximately 110 field investigators at the WFP&I's headquarters to investigate the fraud both on active and closed cases. Now, the referrals in this unit come mainly from district eligibility workers, the Central Fraud Reporting Line, WeTip, which is another reporting hotline, computer matches such as wage and asset matches, direct calls from the public, and referrals from other public and private agencies. The investigators investigate roughly 30,000 to 40,000 cases annually. Of these cases, 5,000 to 8,000 of them have fraud currently occurring, or presently occurring. And on top of that, every year they send about 1,000 cases to the district attorney for possible prosecution, and most of them are accepted for prosecution. And of these 1,000 cases, about 95% of them contain convictions with court-ordered restitutions on most. And so lastly, you're going to turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Tony. Now I'm just going to briefly discuss the risks and exposures relative to welfare fraud. The main source of risks and exposures consist of vulnerabilities within these government-funded assistance programs themselves. Let's take Social Security disability fraud, for example. If an eligible person applies for benefits, and he or she is denied, it's possible and in fact quite frequent that this person will apply again and be accepted on the second go around without any changes in their circumstances. So this obviously points out a weakness within the system of verifying who these individuals are and if they're in fact eligible for the program. Another example of one of these vulnerabilities within the system of Social Security disability is the listing of impairments. Take, for example, the listing of mental impairments, that it's so inclusive that it's possible for anyone to qualify for these benefits. So affective disorders may include, in this section, decreased energy and difficulty concentrating. So I'm not aware of anyone who hasn't had these problems. So what I'm trying to say is part of the problem is the more inclusive and accommodating that the government tries to make these programs, the more vulnerable they can actually become to fraud perpetrators. My next point is how these benefit programs can actually provide pressures and opportunities for individuals to perpetrate fraud. Let's take welfare for example. A single mom who's making $29,000 annually gross income effectively ends up with over $57,000 in income and benefits if she, maximizes all the available programs. This could provide pressure to take handouts instead of working. If a person who is, eligible to work, it might be more pressure to take a handout rather than working a job, especially if they can have higher compensation for this. So also, as we stated, the flaws in the systems can provide the opportunity to perpetrate fraud as well. So the systems themselves are the main source of risks and exposures due to the vulnerabilities within. In conclusion, welfare fraud, as Curtis stated, is any misuse of government-funded programs and not necessarily limited to the ones that we've covered today. And this type of fraud should be continually studied in order to minimize this type of fraud from occurring through preventative and detective measures. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you.